2026-2027. The Casino Gaming General Regulations 2025 under the Casino Gaming Act. And finally, the Auditor General's Department Appropriation Accounts under Head 2827, the Resident Magistrates Court for the year 2012-2013. The report, by way of information, we have the report of the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the motion for exemptions brought on behalf of the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew South, the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew East Central, and the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew Northwestern. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives. To the Honourable Senate, I have the honour to advise the Honourable Senate that on the 10th day of February 2026, the following bills were passed in the House of Representatives. A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Assets Tax Specified Bodies Act was passed with no amendment, and a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act was passed with one amendment. Most Honourable Juliet Holness, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Mr. President, I signify my willingness to take charge of the bills.
A bill shortly entitled the Assets Tax Specified Bodies Amendment Act 2026, read a first time, and a bill shortly entitled the Income Tax Amendment Act 2026, read a first time.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the second reading of the bills and further notice that at a later stage today, I will ask for suspension of the standing orders to allow the bills to be taken through all their concluding stages.
Thank you, Minister. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move, whereas Section 72 of the Casino Gaming Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the Commission may, with the approval of the Minister, make regulations for the purpose of giving effect to the provisions of the Act, and whereas on the 3rd day of December 2025, the Commission, with the approval of the Minister, made the Casino Gaming General Regulations 2025, and whereas subsection 3 of Section 72 of the Act provides that the regulations made under the section shall be subject to affirmative resolution, and whereas it is desirable that the Casino Gaming General Regulations 2025 be affirmed by resolution, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable Senate as follows. This resolution may be cited as the Casino Gaming General Regulations 2025 resolution, and 2, the Casino Gaming General Regulations 2025, which were laid on the table of the Senate on the 20th day of February 2026, is hereby affirmed.
Thank you, Minister. Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business. Minister.
President, I now move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take second reading of the bills shortly entitled the Asset Tax Specified Bodies Amendment Act 2026 and the Income Tax Amendment Act 2026, and to take them through all their concluding stages.
Members would have heard the Minister and recognize that you are dealing with the two pieces of legislation simultaneously. Those in favor? Against? Minister?
Mr. President, thank you. Mr. President, it is intended today to address the Income Tax Amendment Act 2026 and the Asset Tax Specified Bodies Amendment Act 2026 together, given the complementarity between how the operation of the income tax and asset tax systems work, and the nature of the administrative amendments that are before us. Mr. President, the Asset Tax Specified Bodies Amendment Act, high level in summary, it advances a measured administrative adjustment to the timing of corporate asset tax filing and payment, an issue that has been under policy consideration for several years, together with the Income Tax Amendment Bill, which provides for an administrative adjustment to the timing and filing and payment of income tax, but also provides a targeted, time-bound response to the disruption caused by Hurricane Melissa and future disasters by ensuring that employer-provided disaster-related support to employees is treated appropriately under the income tax framework. Mr. President, as Jamaica continues to address the budgetary and fiscal realities of recovery and rebuilding stronger from Jamaica's worst disaster, these bills reflect this government's commitment to fairness, to compassion, and to sound fiscal governance. I'll first address the matter of the filing and payment of taxes, and then turn to the disaster-related income tax treatment. Mr. President, under the current framework, corporate taxpayers are required to finalize audited financial statements, prepare annual income tax returns, and make final tax payments within a relatively compressed period following the end of the year assessment. This timeline has long been considered in many quarters as a source of compliance pressure for corporate taxpayers and accountants and auditors, given the sequencing and complexity of the year-end financial reporting obligations. The issue of adjusting the annual filing and payment date has been under active consideration since 2021, including a formal proposal raised during the 2021-2022 budget debate and subsequent reference in the minister's opening presentation for the 25-26 budget debate. Mr. President, the current fiscal circumstances have created an opportunity to advance this reform in a careful and measured manner. Mr. President, the two bills before us provide for a limited adjustment to the annual filing and payment date, moving the final return and payment date to April 15, commencing with the year of assessment 2025. For administrative consistency, the Asset Tax Specified Bodies Amendment Bill aligns its filing and payment date for asset tax with the revised corporate income tax timeline, recognizing that the asset tax assessments are derived from the same underlying financial statements used for income tax purposes. It's important to emphasize that this change is deliberately narrow in scope. It applies only to corporate income tax and asset tax. It does not affect PAYE, individual income tax obligations, or the existing quarterly estimated income tax prepayment schedule. The amendment is intended to reduce compliance pressure, to improve administrative coherence, and better align revenue realization with fiscal planning, while remaining consistent with the government's overall fiscal framework. Mr. President, I want to make note of a point that has been under some discussion, that particularly within the accounting firms, and I suspect that there are members on both sides who may want to say more about it, but there is a variance between the estimated tax return filing dates, which remain at March 15, and the final return date of April 15. So there are different dates for the filing of the ITO7 for income tax, as it remains in March 15, and the ITO2, which remains at April 15. I just want to make it clear that the ministry is aware of this difference, and while they're always happy to listen and to look at issues where there are concerns, due to fiscal considerations, these dates cannot be changed now. So this is the dates which are being concretized within the bills before us are the dates which will be relevant for filings in the next 3 weeks. Mr. President, on the matter of disaster relief, last October, Hurricane Melissa inflicted devastation on Jamaica on a scale that has not been experienced before in our nation's history. In addition to the unfortunate loss of life, and it's always important to remember the families that have been affected in our thoughts and prayers, but in addition to loss of life And in addition to the extensive damage to public facilities and essential infrastructure, there was widespread destruction of homes, businesses, lives, and livelihood. Mr. President, the physical damage alone, as we have stated before, was estimated at billions of dollars, such that we are clear that Melissa was not only the most destructive, but also the most costly natural disaster in Jamaica's history. Beyond physical destruction, the hurricane disrupted employment, income flows, and many households' abilities to meet basic needs in the immediate aftermath. In the context of this national disruption and the personal hardship and uncertainty that Jamaicans were experiencing, many employers were moved with compassion and stepped forward to provide emergency financial assistance to their employees. We commend these corporate entities and small businesses who all understood that people are at the heart of every business. They stepped forward to not only care, but they provided cash as well. Mr. President, these payments were not made as remuneration for services rendered, but as support for personal recovery, welfare, and basic survival during a period of national distress. Mr. President, as a caring administration, the government took a view that the automatic application of tax laws should not diminish or disincentivize humanitarian assistance provided in response to a disaster, and that businesses should in fact be supported in their supportive outreach to employees. The Minister of Finance and Public Service announced that the government would move to establish a framework to allow the non-taxable treatment of post-Melissa disaster relief support provided by employers to their employees. And this immediate treatment is now being confirmed in law. Beyond this, however, recognizing that this is unlikely, sadly, to be our last disaster, a framework, a sustainable framework, is also being created. Allow me to provide a bit more context, Mr. President. Under Section 2.1 of the Income Tax Act, emoluments are defined broadly to include salaries, wages, fees, and any other benefits arising from employment, all of which are ordinarily subject to tax. Additionally, outside of the minister's discretionary remission power under Section 86, which applies only where it's considered just and equitable on a case-by-case basis, there is no standing statutory provision that allows disaster relief payments to be treated consistently as non-taxable following a declared disaster. The reliance on discretion, Mr. President, is thought to be neither efficient nor equitable in the context of a large-scale national emergency. It creates uncertainty for employers seeking to assist their workers, inconsistency in tax treatment across similarly situated employees, and inequity for those who may receive relief only to see it partially eroded through taxation. So, Mr. President, the amendments to the Income Tax Act are intended to give legislative effect to the commitment earlier expressed by Minister Williams. It converts a necessary policy response into a clear statutory framework, providing certainty to employers, employees, and tax administration Jamaica alike, while ensuring that compassion and fiscal responsibility are properly aligned in law. Mr. President, the bill provides that disaster relief honoraria paid by employers to employees during the period November 1st, 2025 to March 31st, 2026 will not be treated as taxable income in the hands of employees. And at the same time, the bill allows such payments to be treated as deductible expenses for employers, provided they are genuinely borne by the employer and supported by appropriate documentation. The bill therefore provides, or rather corrects an outcome that would otherwise undermine the very purpose of the relief being provided. Mr. President, it's important to emphasize that the relief is carefully bounded and does not represent an open-ended exemption. The measure is deliberately intended to a defined post-disaster period, and it is designed to operate only in the specific context of the Melissa recovery in the first instance. Furthermore, the framework provides a prescribed cap to be determined by the minister, intended to strike an appropriate balance between providing meaningful support to affected workers and maintaining the principal structure of the income tax system. Mr. President, this approach minimizes revenue risk and ensures that the exemption remains proportionate in nature duration, and fiscal impact. In addition, the Tax Administration Jamaica is empowered through prescribed record-keeping and reporting requirements to verify compliance with the relief, thereby safeguarding against abuse and ensuring transparency and accountability in its application. Mr. President, the bills are together intended to provide support for employees during recovery from Hurricane Melissa, to provide certainty to employers, to improve administrative efficiency, and to preserve integrity of the system. They also look forward and provide a framework that will allow, in the event of future disasters, for the requisite orders to be made to allow for, again, appropriately time-bound disaster relief to be provided by employers to employees. I commend these two bills to both sides and look forward to their support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Minister. No, I don't think you should hold it, Mr. Ferguson, Senator Ferguson. Let check. Comment here. Use a stand. Try and use a stand. Thank you very much, Senator Small Ferguson. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, my contribution today is specific to the Asset Tax Amendment Act 2026. As the Minister indicated, the bill proposes to amend the filing and payment date for the asset tax. It doesn't reduce the tax, it doesn't phase it out, it does not commit to removing the tax. It simply changes the date when it's filed and when it's paid. And while these administrative adjustments may be necessary from time to time, this amendment, in our view, misses the central issue in relation to this tax entirely. Because, Mr. President, the real issue with respect to the asset tax is not when the tax should be paid. The real issue is whether the tax, which is currently a burden to financial institutions, its customers, and its shareholders, should continue to exist at all. Mr. President, let's speak plainly about why this tax is problematic. The asset tax does not tax profit. It doesn't tax success. It taxes the mere existence of capital. You're being punished for putting capital to work in the economy. In simple terms, a financial institution pays the tax whether it makes money or not. I mean, I don't think anybody could argue that that sounds inconsistent. It pays whether the economy is strong or weak. It pays whether lending and investing is booming or slowing. This is not how most taxes work, Mr. President. Normally, when a business earns more, it pays more. When it earns less, it pays less. That is fair and logical. But this tax does not move with performance. It's fixed against the size of a company's balance sheet. So even in difficult times, even when margins are tight, even when institutions are trying to support recovery, as all financial institutions should be doing now, the tax remains. It means, Mr. President, that the cost of this tax doesn't simply sit on the books of the financial institution. It shows up in higher borrowing costs. It shows up in lower dividends to all investors, to include pensioners, all investors, small and large. it reduces the investment capacity of financial institutions, and there is less room for these institutions to support businesses and individuals. It quietly, like a phantom, increases the cost of capital in this country. And in a developing country like Jamaica, capital is not a luxury. We're a country with scarce resources, as we are constantly reminded. Capital is what finances homes, businesses, infrastructure, and jobs. Exactly. The tax is distortionary, and that's the issue surrounding it. It affects the ability of Jamaicans to borrow, to invest, to save, and to earn ultimately. And that is why this tax, by its very design, works against the growth that we said that we want to achieve in this stage of our history. Mr. President, so you may ask yourself, why was this tax introduced to begin with? And that is an important context to set. The asset tax was introduced at a time when the country faced unsustainable debt, limited fiscal space, and severe economic vulnerability. Jamaica's recovery from that point did not happen by accident. It was the result of deliberate legislative and fiscal reforms, including the necessary restructuring of Jamaica's debt through the National Debt Exchange, the imposition of fiscal discipline, through binding fiscal rules, and the country's engagement with the International Monetary Fund in 2013, after we effectively abandoned them in the previous administration. Right? It was the People's National Party who made the hard decisions at that time to introduce this tax. Those reforms were understandably imposed at that time and caused a burden on the economy. But it is important to state, that that burden was ultimately borne by Jamaicans. It was borne by our financial services sector. It was borne by Jamaican investors. The National Debt Exchange required domestic institutions, pension funds, individual investors to accept lower yields, extend maturities, and reduce returns in order to help to stabilize the country's finances. And at that time, the financial services sector stepped up in the national interest. They accepted those sacrifices because they understood, all Jamaicans understood, that these measures were necessary for a time to restore Jamaica's stability. And because they were assured that these measures, these extraordinary measures, were only being introduced for a period and that they were temporary, they acted in good faith. Mr. President, these sacrifices were a bridge to carry us from the instability that the government of the day inherited to the stability that is celebrated in the current day. Right? It was a bridge from the instability that the government of the day inherited to the stability that we celebrate today. Mr. President, I contend that that bridge is now crossed. The very reforms, Mr. President, that were required and those sacrifices that were made, they succeeded. The debt has declined significantly. Fiscal stability has now been restored. Jamaica's macroeconomic credibility has been reestablished. Yet, several of the temporary measures, Mr. President, introduced during that time remain in place, to include this one. What was introduced was meant to be extraordinary, and it has now become ordinary. And that raises serious questions, Mr. President, about fairness and credibility. Mr. President, there is near universal agreement across institutions, administrations, and across the financial services system that the asset tax is distortionary and it should not exist as a permanent feature in our tax regime. The International Monetary Fund, as far back as 2016, at that time, contemplated that the government would make due on its commitment to remove the asset tax. And they explicitly welcomed the intention to remove the asset tax, recognizing the distortionary nature of it. The current government itself has acknowledged on several occasions that the tax is distortionary. In his presentation of the 2020-2021 budget, the former Minister of Finance, Dr. Nigel Clark, in announcing an intention to reduce the asset tax from 0.25% to 0.125%, noted that the tax was distortionary, and although it was levied on financial institutions, it was filtering through to ordinary Jamaicans, to the borrowing public, to investors, and that it was a disincentive to house assets here in Jamaica. That sounds counter to what we want. The statement was also consistent with the government's decision to abolish the asset tax for unregulated entities in 2019. Right? So only the financial institutions bear the burden now. The private sector organization of Jamaica, under its immediate past president, Mr. Mitri Siaga, wrote formally to the minister in 2023 on behalf of the Jamaica Bankers Association, the Jamaica Securities Dealers Association, and the Jamaica Insurance Association, calling for the removal of the asset tax and reminding the government of its commitment to do so. There's no serious institutional voice that can argue that this tax is sound economic policy. Mr. President, it's also important to recognize that the financial services sector did not only step up in 2013 when the reforms were initially made, but continued to act in good faith even when Jamaica's fiscal position had improved. When the government proposed, Mr. President, to remove or reduce rather the asset tax from 0.25% to 0.125%, the reduction was ultimately deferred with the consent of the sector as the pandemic fell upon us in March of 2020. Right? The sector accepted the continuation of this higher tax rate during a period of national interest, recognizing the extraordinary circumstances that were facing us at that time. That was another sacrifice that was made, Mr. President, in good faith. It was understood, however, that this would be temporary, and that once the crisis passed, the original commitment to reduce the tax would ultimately be fulfilled. Yet, here we are years later, still collecting the tax. This is not consistent with the commitments that were made. Mr. President, we recognize the time, right? The minister referenced the worst disaster that we have faced in our history, possibly. That is Hurricane Melissa. And we're now faced with a period of reconstruction and recovery and what is expected to be a temporary blip to our fiscal situation. But Mr. President, as I have said before in this honorable house, national recovery requires capital. The government cannot do it alone. It requires investment. It requires lending. It requires strong financial institutions, Mr. President, capable of supporting economic rebuilding. Yet we continue to penalize those very institutions that will be central and very important to supporting the recovery of our economy. That's counterproductive, Mr. President. Beyond the economics, there is a fundamental question, Mr. President, of credibility here, right? And let's just lay that on the table, and principle with respect to the government. During Jamaica's reform period, the financial services sector Jamaican investors, and the ordinary Jamaican bore significant burdens, whether obvious or otherwise, in the national interest. We participated in the national debt exchange. We absorbed those reduced returns. We accepted the asset tax during the pandemic, understanding the extraordinary measures that needed to be taken at that time. And those sacrifices were made in good faith, understanding that this thing was not going to be a permanent feature of the system. That's the principle at stake. Right? And we have seen this play out in other places where temporary measures have become permanent measures without even reference to them. When the withdrawals from the National Housing Trust, Mr. President, began years ago, it was strongly opposed by the party that forms the current government, right? But the administration of the day recognized the need for extraordinary sacrifice, temporary sacrifice. Yet, over a decade after the withdrawals were supposed to end, 10 years, they have conveniently continued over $110 billion, Mr. President, incremental to what was contemplated, have been withdrawn. It's not an issue of rhetoric, it's about consistency. I say I'm going to do this, and then I do something else because it is convenient. If extraordinary measures are justified during a crisis, and we've been hearing that, right? Then they must be reassessed once stability returns. Otherwise, what we introduced as temporary becomes enduring extraction. And when commitments are not honored, Mr. President, confidence in fiscal policy is going to be weakened, right? So, Mr. President, at its core, this matter is one of principle. Extraordinary measures introduced during a time of crisis, such as the asset tax, must not become permanent features of the system long after the crisis has passed and without further reference or mention. When sacrifices are made in the national interest, Mr. President, and when reform succeeds, there must be a corresponding commitment to unwind the temporary burdens that are put forward as part of those recovery efforts. That's the basis of credibility. That's the basis of trust. And that's the basis of sound fiscal policy. What is required now is not a further administrative adjustment to the policy, but a clear commitment from the government, one that they actually keep this time around. We believe, Mr. President, that the government should commit, of course, in the context of fiscal conditions normalizing post-recovery from Hurricane Melissa, to a clear plan to phase out this distortionary tax. The plan should be time-bound and should be legislated, because it is clear that if it isn't legislated, it won't happen. Right? Sounds familiar? Mr. President, this is the kind of signal that Jamaica needs, with the government honoring its commitments in this regard, not only when it is convenient to do so, right, and not when temporary measures are introduced that become permanent. They shouldn't be allowed to quietly become permanent. The government should be upfront about it. There are some people who have gone further than I have in relation to the phasing out of this tax and have called for or suggested that the amounts that have been collected beyond what was originally intended in relation to this tax, that those amounts should be rebated. There are people who have called for that, and that's a separate matter, Mr. President. The immediate and I think reasonable ask is far simpler, which is a clear and structured path to bring this tax to an end. Mr. President, Jamaica's recovery was built on discipline, reform, and shared sacrifice. Sacrifice that we on this side own. Completing that reform, Mr. President, it requires consistency. Right? It requires principle, Mr. President. And the time has come, Mr. President, to provide clarity, to restore balance, and to phase out this temporary measure in a deliberate and credible way. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Small Ferguson. Senator Duncan. You may need your microphone, Senator Duncan.
Mr. President or Mr. Acting President. My fellow Senate colleagues, I stand here today in... No, you can't barely hear me? Okay. That's on? Yeah, I'm here this morning to place on record my support for the proposed amendments to the Income Tax Act and the asset tax to change the filing deadline for the payment of the income tax and the asset tax from March 15 to April 15. Mr. Ferguson will get to you in a minute, sir. I'm also placing on record my support for the amendments to the Income Tax Act to facilitate non-taxable disaster relief payments during declared disasters. In doing so, Jamaica will be better able to minimize the fiscal risk by creating greater certainty and timing of tax revenues and cash flow for more effective management of our fiscal affairs on an ongoing basis and during periods in which a declaration of disaster has been issued. Mr. President, I will begin with the amendment to change the date of filing from March 15th to April 15th for the business community. The government fiscal year closes on March 31st and it observes cash accounting. The current regime means that the GOJ must wait until the main income tax cash inflows come in by March 15th. By moving the payment deadline to April 15th, it should facilitate better cash flow planning for the GOJ and the business community. Mr. President, in his first Economic and Fiscal Assessment reported 2025, the Independent Fiscal Commission brought attention to the potential fiscal risk, and it is noted that a significant portion of collections are expected in the last 2 weeks of March when the final income tax returns are due. This nevertheless is a notable fiscal risk, as any material fallout during this period with little to no opportunity for adjustments could jeopardize achievement of the fiscal targets for fiscal year 24-25. He was actually speaking to that 24-25 fiscal year. And it would have spillover implications for the upcoming fiscal year. To minimize this risk going forward, the government should give due consideration to adjusting the timeline for filing of tax returns, specifically shifting the date from the last month of the fiscal year to a month in the first quarter. We saw this risk materialize in the previous financial year. The revenue underperformed when compared to the budget for the full year 23-24. This was primarily due to the revenue outturn for the month of March 2024. Tax revenues for March 2024 were actually 1.7% higher than the March of the previous year, but $28 billion or 20% less than budgeted. The main contributor to the shortfall was the corporate income tax, which was $14.3 billion lower than programmed for the fiscal year. At the time, several individuals who filed did not make the indicated tax payments within the required timeline. There was actually a reason for this, because this was when IFRS 17 was introduced as an accounting standard, and therefore what happened was that there were, in closing out accounts, there were challenges in doing so, and therefore the people went beyond the end of March in making payments. Corporates, primarily financial institutions. As a result, there was underperformance of revenue in March 2024, which had implications for the programmed revenue estimates for the fiscal year. Now, bear in mind, this is when we had a fiscal rule that we could not run a deficit greater than 0.3% of GDP, because we had to run a balanced budget. And therefore, it actually exceeded it, that fiscal rule, and then we had to revisit it in terms of to justify why it is that that rule was breached in that period. So we actually ran the revenue shortfall resulted in a fiscal surplus of $1.1 billion, while there was a budget balance of $9.1 billion. The target was $1.1 billion. So we did actually run a fiscal surplus. However, it was below budget. For reporting purpose, the figure for corporate income tax in the government accounts also includes the sum for asset tax. Even though the government has larger year-end revenue targets relative to the initial budget over the years, this uncertainty does not augur well for the predictability of revenue flows, particularly in instances where companies file their income taxes by March 30, but do not remit them to the government before the March 31st deadline. Currently, tax revenues are disproportionately concentrated in the month of March, with the data indicated that on average, approximately 15% of total revenues flow into the government's coffers in the month of March. And this has been occurring since February 2013, where we have observed it, due to the receipts of PAYE, corporate income tax, and asset tax, which also show a similar percentage uptick in the month. For the rest of the year, the monthly average contribution to tax revenues is approximately 6 to 7%. Therefore, revenue inflows for the month of March are almost double the receipts in a standard month. Having this deadline at the end of the year poses a significant fiscal risk, as the government cannot sufficiently recalibrate its fiscal position to correct any deviations from budgeted projections. It also has the effect of reducing the base upon which the estimated revenues are made for the following year, which has further secondary effects for the succeeding fiscal years. So it affects your base numbers going into the new financial year and your forecast. The Independent Fiscal Commission has also endorsed the move by the government and noted that it welcomes its favorable consideration of the suggestion. The move strengthens fiscal planning and forecasting and gives the government additional space to correct for any possible shortfalls throughout the year, while improving cash flow management that better reconciles monthly expenditures with revenues. The government couldn't plan fully on its tax revenue, since most of the inflows for the year arrived in the last 2 weeks of March of the fiscal year. but moving to April means better planning for the new fiscal year. But why now? Why would we do this now? It's an opportune time because the fiscal rules have been suspended in the wake of Hurricane Melissa. So now is an opportune time. The first year of implementation of the move can be a challenge since the revenues would not arrive until the following fiscal year in April, which means you end the current year in March with a deficit. Normally, we would have been required to run a minimum surplus of 0.3% of GDP, but since this target has been relaxed, given our expected fiscal deficit will be exceeded and is projected at $134 billion, our fiscal deficit, or 4.9% of GDP in this current fiscal year. The government will now have to have more accurate baseline figures and reporting, which augurs well for fiscal planning into the future. This also has positive effects for taxpayers and tax administration. But, Mr. President, the move to shift the deadline has the positive effects being that the corporate profits and the nature of corporate profits, that they're differential in nature and they're not fixed like PAYE salaries, and as a result, these must be estimated. Currently, the year of assessment for income tax purposes is a calendar year, irrespective of the accounting period. The annual income tax return for the prior year-over-year is liable to be filed by March 15th after the year of assessment. The current process is suboptimal as the income tax returns and the associated tax payments are often prepared based on provisional, unaudited financial numbers due to timing pressures on the businesses and audit firms to finalize their financial statements within this compressed window of 10 weeks. However, when audited financial statements are completed and a final figure is ascertained, a revised filing must be done. If there is another payment, the balance is paid later and the sum is refunded, and when there is an overpayment, the excess can also be set off against future returns. Interest charges and penalties also apply for late payment. Therefore, Mr. President, moving the corporate tax filing payment deadlines from 15th March to 15th April 2026 is welcome as it provides more time for corporate taxpayers to prepare and firm up their financial numbers for the prior year of assessment in order to prepare and file their annual income tax return. Many companies prepare their accounts to 31st December, which historically has just left 10 weeks to complete the exercise. And an additional 30 days will provide some additional space to ease the pressure somewhat on the business community, as well as their internal accounts, external advisors, and auditors. It also should reduce the number of refilings required where a return is filed by 15th of March based on provisional numbers and a refiling is necessary when the financial tax numbers are finalized. So it brings more efficiency to the process. The shift to April 15th reduces overall administrative effort for all concerned, including the TAJ, as it ensures more accurate filing and facilitates better cash flow for corporate entities who now have a longer period to pay. Administrative inefficiency and duplication are also reduced since it removes the need for revised filings, as I said before. The concerns from the accounting firms were addressed by the House Leader. Thank you very much. The asset tax amendment shifted the date to April 15th. I also, primarily for the same reasons as a corporate income tax filing date, support the amendment to change the date for the filing of the annual declaration of the value of assets and payments of asset tax to April 15th. This will bring greater harmonization and efficiency to all stakeholders involved in the process. I would also like to speak about asset tax. All stakeholders have acknowledged, the business community, the government of Jamaica, the IMF, we have all acknowledged, this side, that side, have all acknowledged that it is distortionary and it is burdensome as it impedes financial intermediation, decapitalizes the financial sector, and increases the cost of capital. The Honorable Minister of Finance, along with other Ministers of Finance on this side, have made a commitment to have it removed once the country's fiscal dynamics improve. Jamaica, at this current moment in time, is facing a severe crisis, severe fiscal pressures. However, the GOJ needs to keep it top of mind, and we all agree. And as the fiscal situation improves, the GOJ should move to put back this removal of the asset tax on the table, as it did in the financial year 2021 financial year, in the budget prior to the COVID pandemic. Notably, at the time, the financial sector came willingly to the table and indicated to the GOJ that the phasing out of the asset tax would be put off until the economy recovered from COVID-19. But alas, here we are again, once again, and we have Melissa. As I indicated earlier, the projected fiscal deficit for the current financial year is $134.9 billion. The projected fiscal deficit for the next financial year, 27-28, is $190 billion. Those are the fiscal forecasts. That's the reality that we face as a country. And all stakeholders need to come together. The government has a responsibility to ensure that we maintain fiscal responsibilities. Therefore, hard choices need to be made. Really tough choices need to be made. And I think, and I wholeheartedly believe that at this point in time, to be able to give a timeline as to phasing out would be, I believe, preliminary. Like, would be, we'd be getting ahead of ourselves if we were to do so. We therefore, however, need to revisit it. And this is what the Minister of Finance, Viva Williams, had said, that it will be revisited and there's a commitment to remove it. Because all of us know it's distortionary and it's suboptimal as a country. But at this point in time, we need to be able to understand, get an appreciation of where we are as a country in terms of our fiscal, how this all unfolds in terms of our economy, economic activity, tax revenues, because it's early days. It's early days. We were just hit by Melissa on October 28th, right? And therefore, this recovery, we need to be able to monitor, manage, and then at an appropriate time, this will be revisited. Mr. President, I now speak to the dedicated frameworks for non-taxable disaster relief payments. Mr. President, I'd like to also commend the amendments to the Income Tax Act, which is intended to provide a dedicated framework for facilitating non-taxable disaster relief payments during declared disasters. During periods of disaster, relying on ad hoc ministerial discretion to provide waivers for tax relief is less than ideal, given the speed and urgency with which needs must be responded to. This carefully targeted and calibrated approach ensures that relief can be delivered in the most seamless and efficient way while minimizing any negative fiscal impact. These amendments also ensure greater transparency and accountability through enhanced reporting and documentation requirements which are geared towards protecting taxpayer resources. This regime institutionalizes the government's fiscal response to the crisis and harmonize it within Jamaica's wider disaster management framework by providing a mechanism for the temporary suspension of income tax obligations on cash-based payments, thereby enabling a greater circulation of money in the economy in the immediate aftermath of the event, helping to stimulate aggregate demand and accelerate recovery. Mr. President, these amendments should be endorsed as they effectively balance the need to deliver tangible benefits to the most vulnerable in an orderly fashion, while preserving the hard-won gains of fiscal consolidation over many years and maintaining the integrity of the income tax system to prevent widespread abuse. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Duncan. Senator Anderson.
I do have that.
1 second, Mr. President. Oh. Don't start my clock yet, Mr. President.
Come back up, Kadoran. Come back.
Senator Anderson, you can go ahead.
Yes, 1 second, Mr. President.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you're on your device.
Oh. Why? Oh, come on. Yeah, 1 second. Yes, how it Murphy goes. All right. Yes. All right, Mr. President. Let me first start by agreeing with with Government Senator Duncan as it relates to amendments to the Income Tax Act. I also wholeheartedly support the amendments, and Senator Duncan went to great length to the point where I was wondering if he was deflecting to explain how and why it was necessary. You know, we now all understand how it works. So I want to spend the majority of my contribution this morning speaking about the amendment proposed to the Asset Tax Act, because I don't think, as Senator Small Ferguson stated, that the issues that the industry is facing has to do with the date of filing or the date of payment. So I propose as well and support the fact that the amendments do not go far enough. Mr. President, I want to talk a little bit about the scale of the impact that the tax has on Jamaica's financial system and by extension the wider economy. I understand that over 80 billion has been extracted from the financial system since 2016, almost 10 billion in the last financial year alone. I soon get to what Keith knows. That is capital that would otherwise, Mr. President, have remained within Jamaica's productive economy. If that capital, allow ourselves to imagine, if that capital existed today as a standalone institution, it would be one of the largest financial groups in this country. Wow. That is the scale of the capital that has been removed. Wow. And it's not just what I am saying, Mr. President. I would remind that the sector has spoken, and it's not good enough just to say that everybody has spoken about it. I want to quote a little bit what has been said by at least 3 players. Mr. Leachin, the chairman of the NCB Financial Group, in just January of this year, so we know it's still the case for NCB Group, publicly reported that NCB has paid approximately $194 million in asset tax since its introduction. US dollars, that's correct. He further indicated in the last year alone over 2.6 billion was paid, with a reported reduction of 41% actually in dividends, if it were to be converted to dividends paid. He said that without the albatross of asset tax, dividends would allow him to better treat with the challenges of his AIC borrowings. I want to quote specifically that he said the big elephant in the room is the asset tax. In 2012, the asset tax was brought on as a temporary measure. We've all said it. When I saw that, he said, it reminded him of the case in Canada where taxes were imposed in 1990 as a temporary measure to fund World War I. In Jamaica's case, Mr. President, the asset tax was in 1919, sorry. In Jamaica's case, Mr. President, the asset tax was brought on as a temporary measure for 3 years, and it is still here. Yes, through JLP and PNP administration, but the JLP administration boasts of how well the economy is doing. The PNP had to bring it on at a time to save where we were. Mr. Leachin went on to say that with 2.5 billion in shares outstanding, that would make the tax about $1.05 per share. Compared to the 3 dividends payments he made of 50 cents in each quarter, a total of $1.50 per share, the dividends could then have been increased to $2.55 per share. That's a 41% pay cut, as he explained. So who wants a 41% pay cut, Mr. President? Who wants one? I would say not the pensioners who hold a large shareholding of shares in groups such as the NCB Group. Public disclosure by the JMB Group indicates that the institution has paid over $9 billion in asset taxes since the tax was introduced. Senator the Honorable Keith Duncan, in his capacity as Group CEO of JMB Group, has publicly stated that the asset tax is distortionary, and I think he echoed that again this morning. It depletes capital, it constrains the ability of financial institutions to expand lending and investment. As late as his 2025 AGM,
and reduce banking fees.
He reiterated that this asset not only is distortionary but not fair to shareholders, and that's why I'm focusing again on, Mr. President, the shareholders. It depletes the capital for the financial institution, but is not fair to the shareholders. It also means that there's a floor, an invisible floor to lending, as it must be added to the cost of doing business, and I believe that Senator Duncan also said that. I would ask if it's still the case for JMB, but I understand the position that Senator Duncan may now be in, and so I won't ask him to answer the question this morning. As shared by Senator Small Ferguson, the PSOJ president made an appeal to the Minister of Finance in 2023, and in 2024, again, he reiterated it when the 2024-2025 budget was tabled. The PSOJ at that time called on the government to remove the asset tax and to take necessary action to implement the following initiatives: the introduction of a new Customs Act and regulation, first mentioned in 2020, a comprehensive review of the Income Tax Act, which some has started, but it's not yet where it needs to be, and the unification of various payroll taxes. So, Mr. President, in summary, I trust it's not a position, this position of the asset tax and the need to remove it is not one on which any responsible CEO would vacillate, given the far-reaching implications. You see, Mr. President, leadership is not convenient and principle is not convenient. The Honorable Minister Nigel Clark, when he was Minister of Finance, condemned the asset tax charged.
I've been ill too, you know.
He did?
I've been ill too.
Oh, wow. Leadership is not convenient, though, Lammy. Leadership is not convenient and principle is not convenient. At the time, Minister Clark said he was philosophically opposed to an asset tax and reiterated that he believes it counterproductive to economic activity. He was of the view that people take action to avoid tax that would be deleterious to the economy, because they would shift assets outside of Jamaica, not doing Jamaica any good. So, Mr. President, the recent utterances from the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Minister Favour Williams, were unclear at best. I'm not sure who plainly understands the direction she's pointing us in. Despite ongoing pressure to remove or reduce the tax, she has said that a rollback will only begin as soon as the national budget allows. What does that mean? What does that mean? Government policy, perhaps. So my questions, Mr. President. Are there specific targets Are there specific targets? I know targets is not a thing you're familiar with, Minister Hill. Are there specific targets to be met? Define, I would like the Minister, the Honourable Minister, define when the national budget allows. What does that mean? Further, why not disclose a targeted time period in which to reduce? So we would welcome some kind of direction around within which years you want to target it, following the attainment of whatever targets, because we don't know the targets. The people of Jamaica don't know the targets.
Adopt a smart approach.
Well, remember, they told me in my first sitting in the Senate, that the Honourable Don Webby used to say, what gets measured gets done. So my request is on behalf of the business community, allow businesses to plan.
That's why I should say.
Where is the engagement? Where is the engagement with the business sector? How can a blanket commitment be accepted when there has been a lack of credibility with commitments? Having sacrificed, the case must be made, I believe. People must know why they're sacrificing and for how much longer. So in summary, Mr. President, I reiterate, dividends and retained earnings do not only accrue to large shareholders, they accrue to pension funds, retirement accounts, and ordinary Jamaicans whose savings are invested in these institutions. It is income foregone. Should I remind us all that during COVID, when pensioners did not get dividends, there was a lot of cry around prescriptions and medication not being able to be bought? Without the asset tax, that capital could have been otherwise reinvested to fund growth. It is productive capacity which is removed from the Jamaican economy. Mr. President, asset tax penalizes capital formation. It taxes assets regardless of whether those assets generate income. It reduces the ability of financial institutions to lend, which a lot of small businesses and medium-sized businesses will require money to grow. It reduces investment capacity. So the bottom line, it suppresses economic growth. Financial institutions are central to national development. They finance housing, they finance business, they finance infrastructure. When capital formation is penalized, economic expansion is constrained, and ultimately it's the Jamaican people who bear the cost. The amendments proposed, while not egregious, do not go far enough. We need to know how much longer we are expected to sacrifice. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Senator Anderson.
Mr. President.
Senator Gale.
Thank you, sir.
Notice that you're being welcomed by both sides of the aisle. I hope that they clap you when you finish your presentation too.
Well,
it's a friend thing. It's a friend thing. I go on. Professor Morris say you're his friend, so he'll clap you.
President, maybe the direction I will take today in the presentation of specifically the income tax amendment bill might be why I will get the attention, because I want to focus on a slightly different perspective in terms of how this income tax amendment and employment regulation targets the working class. Positive. It allows tax-free disaster relief honoraria paid by employers to employees during officially declared disasters. And it also seeks to extend the corporate income tax filing deadline from March 15 to April 15th. But, President, this policy was shaped by hard lessons learned following Hurricane Melissa, which exposed many workers where their incomes collapsed after what is considered a climate shock. Mr. President, the amendment in my mind is a very good measure to support the working class in terms of a social provision. Why this legislation amendment matters? The reality, President, is that when disaster strikes, homes are damaged, utilities are disrupted. We saw where transportation was compromised. We saw where workplaces were temporarily closed, and evidently income was interrupted. The workers, they still face rent, mortgages, food and utilities. They face dramatically the rebuilding cost. This bill is seeking to remove the hardship and a burden to the working class, and is something that as a trade unionist I welcome and my colleagues must welcome. What the amendment does, it gave the employers the opportunity to provide the grants or emergency assistance paid directly to workers. And it was not treated as a taxable income. So you have a situation where a worker would get 100% of relief that goes directly to the worker. Faster recovery for families, Mr. President. The intention was to reduce debt and borrowing, promote greater financial resilience, and less pressure on other public welfare programs. Mr. President, in simple terms, every dollar paid is a dollar kept. And so this meant a lot to the working class. And we might think that this amendment is an administrative, just a tax amendment. But it is, in my mind, a very serious social support mechanism at a time when it's badly needed. And it was a benefit to the working class. Mr. President, what it did was to maintain their purchasing power. It also reduced the risk of a lot of employees falling into poverty. A lot of our members were challenged during that hurricane, the passage of that hurricane. To the employer, there would have been some benefits also. Quicker return to work, lower stress and mental strain on both the employee and the employer, and it would have created stronger household resilience. Mr. President, I want to use the opportunity to commend the government for the well-thinking approach in terms of this piece of amendment. So it gave the employers at the time to pay this one-off disaster grant, offer emergency stipend, because a lot of employers were wondering at the time, what could we do for our employees? It provided rebuilding allowances, it covered transportation, and in some cases we have seen where even the reallocation costs, because some employees had to move out of those geographical locations that were impacted. And so we found another situation where, for instance, for argument's sake, there were some employees in this side of the country who were not impacted, but their families were impacted. And they could have gone out to receive these grants and lend support to their families in the regions that were affected. Mr. President, this is a kind of measure that creates to the employer a faster workforce stabilization. You know, there are some employers that the extent to which their employees were affected and their ability to offer this kind of grant, this kind of support, created that kind of workforce stabilization. One of the other things that they would have said is that it reduced their level of absenteeism. Because here is a situation where the workers were impacted, and their ability now to utilize these funds, they were better able to respond to their physical needs. And it created a kind of, and you would appreciate this, Senator Duncan, that higher morale and loyalty as an employer and for business continuity. Mr. President, this is both, in my mind, a good labor policy and a good business policy. So colleagues would have spoken about the corporate filing extension, which provide more accurate compliance, somewhat reduce the administrative pressure, and it creates less penalty risk. Because the less penalty risk remove that or mitigated against that mad March rush that would have been faced by many employers. So the extension would have been, allowing companies to recover. Important for me, Mr. President, is accountability and transparency. So to evaluate the effectiveness of this measure, I want to recommend that the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service collect and publish annual data, including, I'd want to see the number of employers utilizing this relief. In my own union, we would have written to some of these employers trying to ascertain whether or not they have utilized this provision. The number of employees supported, the sectors utilizing it most, the geographical distribution, Mr. President. And I would want to have an appreciation as to the average assistant per worker. What this does is that, Mr. President, this kind of data to me would improve any further policy design. Because I'm not treating this as a one-stop shop for this particular event, but how we treat with guiding our own disaster planning and, support evidence-based amendments to not only legislations of this, but policy direction. Mr. President, let us accept something. Climate change is real. As a small developing state, Jamaica is bound to face more frequent hurricanes, flooding, heat stress, tourism disruptions, agricultural losses, and infrastructural damage. So disasters like this must not be viewed as an exceptional event. They are becoming a structural economic risk. And therefore, Mr. President, these kinds of amendments must be seen as not as a first step, but it's certainly not the last. In my State of the Nation, I would have spoken about the need for us to pursue some additional measures to protect the workers in this downfall. And I would have spoken about the unemployment insurance scheme, a kind of contributory national scheme providing temporary wage replacement and supporting layoff and closures. I'm not proposing to replace the Employment Termination and Redundancy Payments Act. Let me make that abundantly clear. But we would have seen in the pandemic and during the course of Melissa how workers would have been laid off and the need for financial support. You know, it is time that we need to have that kind of social collaborative dialogue between government, trade unions, civic society, and employers as to how we can put in place short-term policies, help firms retain workers during downturns, and even the most exposed set of workers during this period of Melissa and this period of disaster. We saw were those workers on short, fixed-term contractual arrangements. And so we have to take steps in place to extend relief and to support. President, colleagues, when we speak about climate change, you know, we often focus on the impact of seawalls, drainage systems, infrastructure. Whilst I accept the fact that these are necessary, but we must also recognize an equally important truth. A country cannot be climate resilient if its workers are economically fragile. And so, in my mind, physical resilience without income resilience simply transfer risk from the environment to the household. And so, President, for workers, the first impact of climate change, it is not theoretical in my mind. It is immediate and financial. So the loss of wages, the reduced working hours, the workplace closures, Mr. President, the layoffs, the destruction of homes, the higher food and transportation costs is a burden to the worker, and we must take steps to mitigate against those burdens. So I am viewing this piece of amendment to our legislation in terms of creating that kind of social protection, a social protection that it would have first made available cash transfers, income replacement, support and assistance through the government. Mr. President, I'm looking to have that kind of discussion where we can relatively look at any piece of legislation that we can infuse the unemployment insurance. Maybe we could consider the national insurance scheme to expand on that and also further look at the Income Tax Act. In making this presentation, I saw where you will never be able to sound like me. You know, in Barbados, they have the national insurance, severance, and unemployment insurance support. In the Bahamas, they have a hurricane emergency grant and payroll support. In Trinidad and Tobago, they have the unemployment benefits via their national insurance board. And I went to Mauritius, where they have wage assistance and disaster relief funds. One of the things being part of the labor movement is that we always have our line of sight on the International Labor Organization. And the ILO promotes this kinds of arrangement. It promotes employment injury protection and unemployment protection models for those states that are vulnerable to climate change. And You know, this shows that social insurance and income protection are both feasible and they can be affordable. And when this provision was put in place, what it did is that it created a measure, because with all that the government has done, and I want to commend the government for the tremendous support that it has given to the country. And I want to use the opportunity to commend my members at the Jamaica Public Service Company Limited for the extent to which they have created the restoration efforts for Jamaica. Mr. President, this bill, this amendment, what it does is that it seeks to protect workers. It encourages employer compassion. It promotes a speedy recovery, and it supports business continuity. And it also strengthens our national resilience. Climate resilience must include income resilience. And as a trade unionist, and I want to extend this to my colleagues as legislators, our duty is to ensure that no worker is pushed into poverty because a storm has passed through. And I therefore support this amendment and urge continued expansion towards unemployment insurance and any other type of emergency income protection and broader social net. And so I commend and support these amendments. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Gale. Senator Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. President. What is being sought by the amendments in this bill, and I will speak to the amendment in the Income Tax Act, is not controversial. The bill is seeking to, it's not controversial, and we support it. The bill is seeking to make non-taxable the hurricane relief honorarium paid by employers to employees to support hurricane recovery. And if the government were to take a direction that contrasts that, it would be unconscionable. The government is not doing that. And to that extent, we support that direction. I appreciate the exuberance of the member when he spoke about how far, Senator Gale, this will go. I'm a bit measured in that exuberance because I appreciate that this is just being made non-taxable on $200,000. So whilst I appreciate that it is a step in the right direction, I am measured in how exuberant I am about this particular direction. So that change is not controversial. The second change that is being sought by the bill is to adjust the filing date to limit the fiscal risk that is associated with allowing income tax returns to be filed in the last quarter, the last month of the fiscal year, moving it from March 15 to April 15. And we appreciate the importance of doing that so as to safeguard revenue performance and the credibility of revenue projections in the upcoming fiscal year. And I note, though, Senator Duncan, that the amendment only adjusts the income tax filing date for corporate entities. And when I checked relative to what was posited in the fiscal policy paper, or the Independent Fiscal Commission review rather, the fiscal commissioner did not decompose that in terms of corporate entities or individuals. He made a broad recommendation to adjust the income tax filing date. Yeah, a recommendation. He made a recommendation to adjust the income tax filing date from March to 15. And presumably he meant for individuals and for corporate entities. But I know that the government is doing so solely for corporate entities. And I suspect the rationale behind that, Minister, is corporate entities would invariably account for the larger share of tax revenue. What I would say, though, is that we should monitor the revenue intake from individuals. Because when I look at the revenue measures, it says that we are expected to collect about 181 billion in income tax, but it doesn't decompose whether that where it will come from in terms of individual or corporate entity. So the important point being made here is that there could be some degree of fiscal risk that is associated with leaving the income tax filing date for individuals unchanged. And we would have a better appreciation if we were able to have a decomposition of the revenues that comes from individuals who have to file income tax. So the recommendation here is that that is something that we should monitor. It should not become a permanent feature going forward, where the income tax filing date for individuals remain at March 15. Because if there's growth in that revenue intake from individuals, and it is still, the filing date is still maintained in March 15, then the fiscal risk is not completely removed. So I would make that recommendation to the government to monitor going forward. And that's our contribution, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator
I am
Tomlinson.
here on my merit.
Thank you very much, Senator Mark Tomlinson. Don't get drawn into any. Thank you, Senator Tomlinson. Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, colleagues, today we consider two amendment bills. Thank you. Today we consider two amendment bills. As many will know, I am a medical practitioner by profession, and it is not ordinarily within my training or experience to speak on matters of revenue and taxation. Yet I felt...
I was just going to say, but no, don't.
Yet I felt led to contribute on these bills because, to me, the work of governance is about more than ensuring good health. At its core, it is about the general well-being of the people, their security, their stability, and their ability to rebuild and plan for the future. It is with this view, the view that the well-being of the citizens go beyond health alone, that I rise to speak on these amendments. At first glance, they may seem short, technical, procedural, neither introduces a new tax, alters a rate, nor expands the tax base. But if we look closer, they speak to something much larger: how our revenue system functions with fairness, precision, and foresight. I begin with the Income Tax Amendment Act 2026. This bill addresses a simple question. When disaster strikes, how should the tax system treat the support of a worker? How should the tax system treat the support a worker receives to rebuild? The answer is clear. Where a disaster has been formally declared under the Constitution of Jamaica or recognized under the Disaster Risk Management Act, employers may provide up to $200,000 in support to affected employees without that support being treated as taxable income. It means the law recognizes context. It means recovery will not be reduced by deduction. It means compassion is not penalized by compliance. When a hurricane tears off a roof, floods a home, or destroys essential property, the payment that helps a family rebuild is not earnings in the ordinary sense. It is assistance in extraordinary distress. This amendment makes the distinction explicit. It balances compassion with discipline. Discipline. Let us be clear. This is not an open door. It is a disciplined framework. I know the opposition doesn't understand that term. Discipline. It applies only when a disaster is formally declared. It is capped. It is time-bound. It is subject to parliamentary oversight. It preserves fiscal integrity while allowing the law to respond intelligently to human hardship. There is something else that is important here. This bill recognizes that recovery is not the sole responsibility of the state. When employers step forward to support workers, that is part of national resilience. By giving statutory recognition to those payments, Parliament acknowledges that recovery is shared across government, businesses, and families. That is a modern approach to social protection. We are not expanding permanent exemptions. We are designing a system that can respond intelligently to extraordinary events without weakening the tax base in ordinary times. A mature revenue framework must be principled enough to protect the tax base, yet precise enough to avoid unintended hardship. This bill reflects that precision. It strengthens coherence between constitutional declarations, executive action, and fiscal consequence. It improves administrative efficiency without altering fundamental obligations. The bill also adjusts the corporate income tax filing deadline from March 15 to April 15, beginning in the 2025 year of assessment. This is an administrative refinement. Companies need time to finalize accounts. A coherent deadline strengthens accuracy, reduces errors, and improves compliance. Once again, timing matters. And that brings me to the second bill, the Asset Tax Specified Bodies Amendment Act 2026. This bill seeks to also change a deadline. What it does is simple but significant. It amends Section 32A of the Asset Tax Specified Bodies Act 2003 to change the date for the filing of the annual declaration of assets and payment of assets tax from the first day of September in each year to the 15th day of April in each year. The assets tax regime applicable to specified bodies is part of the broader fiscal framework through which the government ensures that public bodies and other designated entities make an appropriate contribution to national revenue. These entities operate within a structured fiscal cycle. The government operates on a financial year that begins on the 1st of April and ends on the 31st of March. It is therefore neither arbitrary nor cosmetic to align tax declarations and payments more closely with that fiscal rhythm. At first glance, this may appear to be a minor procedural adjustment, but in the architecture of public finance, timing is not trivial. Timing is structure. Timing is discipline. Timing is governance. Mr. President, modern fiscal governance is built on systems. It is built on predictability. It is built on coherence between statutes, administrative practice, and financial reporting cycles. This amendment simply corrects a mismatch between the asset tax deadline and the wider fiscal framework. By bringing the deadline into alignment, we make compliance easier, oversight more straightforward, and revenue collection more predictable, all of which support disciplined budgeting and orderly public spending. Look closely, and a pattern emerges from these two bills. Both refine timing, both improve clarity, both strengthen governance. One bill ensures the system can respond with fairness in extraordinary circumstances. The other ensures the system operates with precision in ordinary times. Together, they demonstrate a simple but powerful principle. A modern tax system must be calibrated, coherent, and capable of discerning context. Mr. President, the government, led by the Most Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Andrew Holness, has consistently demonstrated its commitment to strengthening public financial management, improving revenue administration, and ensuring transparency and accountability in the handling of public resources. It's time for listening. These proposed amendments are entirely consistent with that mandate. They promote coherence, support administrative efficiency, and reinforce fiscal discipline without imposing additional substantive burdens. They show that responsible governance is not just about what we collect, but how we collect. That is with fairness, accuracy, and integrity. For those reasons, Mr. President, I support the passage of the Income Tax Amendment Act 2026 and the Asset Tax Specified Bodies Amendment Act 2026. And I commend both to this Honorable Senate. May it please you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thompson. Thank you very much, Senator Thompson. Senator Brown.
Thank you, President. I must commend you for your photography. I saw you at the funeral yesterday, taking pictures.
Oh my, you saw me on the funeral on TV because you weren't there.
Yeah, but I saw you.
Oh, you joined virtually?
I joined virtually.
It was, Senator Brown is talking about the send-off Stephen Catcore. Very, very nice event.
I fully agree with you. President, in the spirit of send-off, Senator Anderson just showed me her phone and said the front bench is likely to be changed. Nationwide is reporting that the front bench is likely to be changed because the cabinet reshuffle is being finalized. But that's for another time.
Did you tell them that I'm available?
I hope you are. I hope you are. I hope you are.
Yes, as the minister rightly pointed out, while I'm available, we certainly know who is not available.
I am not. President.
When I see
Senator Brown, you want the other microphone?
No, as I rise to address both bills before us,
I like that.
I am tempted to read from the Jamaica Observer, a favorite newspaper of that side, of an article on October 15, 2025. And the first paragraph says, JMMB Group Chief Executive Officer Keith Duncan is reiterating his push for the government to abolish the asset tax, which continue to negatively impact entities in the financial sector. He found support today in Senator, as we call him on this side, the tall Senator, Senator Ramon Small Ferguson. He found support in Senator Anderson, but we couldn't find the support for him in his own presentation. I know deflection when I see it, Senator, and your speech was a master class in deflection. But sufficient to the time, because it raises issue when your favorite station nationwide report you have called on the workers to make sacrifice, public sector workers, but you have corrected it to say you really only call on them to make more restraint. The reality is, the asset tax, as Senator Raman Small Ferguson pointed out, came at a particular time in the country's history. And there are some other measures which came at a particular time. The truth be told, in 2011, nobody in the world wanted to deal with Jamaica. The thing in Washington was, let Jamaica fail. In fact, the IMF managing director came to Jamaica and said, the talk was, has Jamaica failed yet? Because nobody wanted to help us. Until a delegation on Christmas Eve of the Black Caucus went across to the IMF and said, you must help Jamaica. And that's the context in which the asset tax came into being. That the private sector supported it then. And the government of the day said it would be temporary. The IMF demanded it, as they demanded the debt swap, and as they demanded Senator Gale wage freeze. That's the context in which it came, and the promise to abolish it. Senator Hill, you was on that side. You were opposed to it. Hardly Shaw was opposed to it. Andrew Warnes was opposed to it. So when you came in 2016, you all promised to abolish it. 10 years after, it's still with us. And the question I have to ask myself is, if the People's National Party government of Portia Simpson Miller, Peter Phillips, Mark Golding heading the Legislative Committee, if they were prepared to take the bold, courageous, decisive measures to protect Jamaica, then to them, the current stability must go. They were prepared to take the tough decisions, and they did it in the interest of the country. We paid a political price because of the opportunism of those who said what we were doing was wrong. Senator Floyd Morris is on record as saying that your attitude to the 11.4 billion from the NHT, another measure that was temporary, remains today, 10 years after. And your plan is to extend it for another 5 years, 15 years, which you had opposed. And I say that because the current situation, Senator Duncan, does require some attention. On the 21st of November, Minister of Information, et al., etc., made a speech, a statement to the House, to the Senate. And I asked you, Minister, about page 8 of that statement, where it spoke about new method of financing. I remember that. And my question to you, was this a code for more taxes? You remember when I asked that? Because I saw the signs. I read the documents. And it was clear that we'll have a chance in the budget to talk about those new taxes. And the no new taxes story has come to an end. It is, because it piggyback on the measures the PNP government took. I made a quip that nobody on that side, probably except for Senator Duncan, knows how much was paid in asset tax over the years. I think Senator Small Ferguson into that. But none of them know it, you know. None of them know it. Not even you, the former technical director. We have all of that. They don't know. Right? I know, but let's assume I don't know. But you are government and you don't even know. So, our bold measures, and the question has to be asked, and I'm going to pose it in a different way, my colleague. Without the asset tax that the PNP imposed, where would the economy be today? And you claim stability. Without the $11.4 billion from the NHT that the PNP creatively put forward, where would the economy be today? So when it comes to stability, talk to the PNP. When it comes to the edge tax, the Isle edge tax, which you say you were opposed to, but you still keep, you have to credit that to the PNP, and the stability of today was to the PNP foresight, was to the PNP vision, to the PNP willingness to take the tough decisions in the best interest of a country that was wrecked by 2011. And with that out of the way, President, I hear this. I want to commend every employer who has given their worker a gift, a relief during the hurricane. Sandals. And others, though they too were affected by Melissa, they give. They give. A lot of employers give. And I want to commend them. And I check Senator Tobias Finson, younger. I check and I say, so as an employer, how much the government give to the workers affected? I soon tell you. I soon tell you what I give. I soon tell you what I give. Because I don't draw taxes from people, you know. It's the government who do it. And the question is, how much does the government give? I tell you how much you give. I see Senator Fitzgerald and Senator Tobias Finson saying they give 3 million. Me? Plenty. And I'll tell you afterwards. But right now, I want to know how much your government gave as an employer. None. Who will benefit from this 200,000 maximum? Who will benefit from it? So let us be clear, Senator Gill. To benefit from this 200,000 as a tax-free benefit, to benefit, you have to be earning 32,600 plus per week. You have to be earning $32,696 per week to benefit. Because if you're not earning that much, then the tax threshold would protect you. And you would not have to pay any tax on that. So let us be clear. If you really want to help more people, what you should do is to say to the backside workers who have suffered damage too in St. Anne's, and the and the other workers who may be earning more than 32,000, let's call it 33,000 per week, what you should be doing is saying, we will add for those workers in that region impacted by Melissa, the 200,000 on top of the tax threshold. So for them, the tax threshold would become 1.9. In that way, people would benefit. The tourist worker, work in hotel. The majority are not earning this level per week. So, nice gesture. We welcome it. But let's be realistic as to who and how many persons are really going to benefit. There is a way to make more people benefit. Add the 200,000 to the threshold for those workers. So, President, it's clear to me that a lot of talk about helping workers is more PR. It's more PR. More PR than reality. They can't tell us how many workers will benefit. And Senator Gale is correct. Give us some data. Give us some data. Data missing. Mr. President, I have long said that the bulk of the workers who are not going to be benefited because, as Senator Illut said, the 1.5 and now the 1.7, let us not forget that 1.5 was funded by $32 billion in taxes over 2 years. Let us not forget that. So the workers have paid for that. They have paid for that in new taxes. $32 billion in taxes, 2016 and 2017. So this is not a great gift that requires us jumping up and down. If we really want to help the workers, I would invite the government to review your income tax measures and remove from paying taxes any worker who is now earning the minimum wage. Because let us remind the world that if you earn minimum wage, you are required to pay education tax, which was introduced in 1983 by their government, but was never used to fund directly education purpose. Remove the tax from the minimum wage worker. Lift the tax threshold for the laundry and uniform for workers like nurses, police, workers in the factory. That's how you benefit more people, if you really want to benefit more people, rather than engage in a PR exercise. If you really want to help workers, remove the taxation on IDT awards. Treat it as how the courts treat judgments, Senator Bennett. So I'm saying, nice PR. To benefit from it, you have to be earning $32,000 plus, nearly $33,000 per week. So if we're clear on that, we support those workers who will get the tax relief, those who are over 33. Believe me, because things tough for them too. But the reality is, don't make a mountain out of a molehill. So, President, much has been said about climate change and the fact that Melissa was on. But I want to read from fiscal policy paper, just presented with the budget document circulated to us today. But last year, fiscal policy paper, as with the interim policy paper, said much the same. So let me read from Appendix 6, page 10. Because somehow, Senator Duncan, the government only realized that it has to put on taxes because of Melissa, hurricane. But this is what the government document says. During the period from 1990 to 2025, Jamaica has been impacted by approximately 15 hurricane systems that reach hurricane strength while affecting the island. And it said the most recent being Melissa. So Melissa is but one. But this government is but one. Yes, it is but one. Well, let's put it this way. One that don't need a 3-pound fish to feed five meals. Yeah. One that doesn't need a 3-pound fish to have 5 meals. Mr. President, point I'm making is that hurricane is not new to Jamaica. It has come in the past, it will come in the future. But the hurricanes of the past have caused some of the tax measures of the past. So the fact that a new hurricane category 5 caused you to come to new tax measures. Hurricane is not, and taxes are not new. And in fact, I urge you to go and read page 11, where it lists out the hurricanes and the names and the years. And you can correlate those years with tax measures. So I'm not criticizing you that you have to go to new tax measures. I'm just simply saying you must admit that the tax measures in the past, some of it were hurricane related. But you know, which of the hurricane was the worst hurricane? The hurricane in 2011 caused by that government abandoning the IMF agreement.
Is that Hurricane Andrew?
It is that hurricane that led to the asset tax being increased. It is that hurricane that led to the edge tax. Is it that hurricane that led to the NHT reduction? That hurricane, Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Audley Shaw, hurricane and all of them. That's the hurricane that caused those measures. But above all, Mr. President, what gives me hope is that they recognize their fallow grounds. They recognize the mistake. And they believe that the mantra of no new taxes would go on forever when the people knew that they were paying more taxes every year. And so, we are not opposed to the specific measures in these bills. We are not opposed to it. We are realistic, but we are honest. We point out what caused those taxes. But they now come as if to say they were on a road to Damascus and they changed from Saul to Paul. The reality, it may be me, but I tell you all the time, I don't cook well, but a 3-pound fish can't feed 5 meals. So, Mr. President, me come from Standpipe in a gully, and if I'm privileged, it's because of the hard work that I carry out that achieved that privileged position. I am privileged because I fight for workers every day. Yes, I am privileged, but compare my privilege and your privilege to Two different privilege. Mr. President, final thing I want to speak to. It's about TAJ. TAJ, and you see it in the left-hand pages of this, have developed a practice in recent times to overtax workers. Let me explain, Senator Thompson. If an intern starts working in July, medical intern, start working in July, that intern is taxed as if to say the July, the August salary is as if that worker was earning from January. And whereas the law requires that TAJ to treat that worker as having the 1.7 tax relief, but haven't earned anything for the first 6 months of the year. And not just for doctors, for other workers as well. TAJ now require that such workers, Senator Duncan, pay taxes as if to say they were working for the full year and earning for the full year, which means that at the end of the year, that worker now must go and file for a refund. And if you can't get the asset tax back out of government, you know how difficult it is to give up a day of work. Or you will have a chance to speak. Let me speak. Is that parliamentary, President? Because if it is, you could say you don't hear it. Well, I am telling you that last week I had a meeting with the University Hospital, with the new CEO acting, with the junior doctors and others. And this issue came up. And they're saying, and she says a lie, well, she can say anything she wants to say. And the issue came up. They said they got advice from THA. But when you do the calculation, those workers have to go and seek a refund. And we have the numbers. We have the numbers. And so I'm urging TAJ to make the adjustment as used to be. So if a worker, be it a doctor, police, whoever, start working in the middle of the year, treat that worker as the law requires. That you do not tax them for the months that you're paying them as if they had worked previous times before. That's the reality. My friend may describe it as a lie, but you know what? No, you change it to misunderstanding from a lie. And that tells me you are confounded. Mr. President, with that, I want to say thank you for allowing us to articulate the issues, and thank you for allowing us to accept that our side, when things were difficult for the country, we made the right choice. We made a bold choice. We were courageous. And they are cowards because their position then, they have reneged on it. And that is the reality, because that is the classical case of your government being a set of hypocrites. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Minister, I'm going to take the 120 motion. Eh? Why are you resisting me? Well, you can come and make a presentation to the Standing Orders Committee always. So, okay. We actually have, Minister, we actually have it in our...
To remove it?
Yes.
Praise the Lord. Mr. President, might the Senate be permitted to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day?
And I must tell you that, anyway, we're going to deal with it. It's practice more than in the standing orders, Okay, so I hear, Madam Clerk, I hear declare without hesitation or reservation that the 120 motion is no longer required for us to sit beyond 130. All in favor? Aye. What? As it does not comply with the standing orders. Everybody is in agreement. It's just practice, you know. Good. Okay, Senator, thank you very much. 1 minute. Thank you, Senator Brown. Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Fitzhenley.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. I have always been of the view that it is important that in policy and statutory posture, any administration ensures that there is certainty that is offered to employees, employers, and tax agencies, while at the same time ensuring that compassion and fiscal prudence are contemplated in law. It is in that spirit that this proposed amendment to the Income Tax Act, which pertains to compassionate payments made to employees during and after Hurricane Melissa, being essentially tax exempt, is important. The bill, sir, is another indication that we have a caring administration at the wicket that is managing Jamaica's affairs. Because it's a fact that after the passage of Hurricane Melissa, many businesses did right by their employees. And I want to join as well in commendation of all business owners who extended conscientious facilitation to their employees, including in particular the Standards Group, which under the leadership of Adam Stewart, not only gave honorarium payments to their employees, not only furnished care packages, but also was early down the wicket in saying, despite the impact of Hurricane Melissa, they would not lay off one single employee. I believe that's deserving of high commendation. Concerning the aspect of the bill which seeks to amend the Act to adjust the annual income tax filing payment for corporate income tax from March 15 to April 15, with effect from 2025 being the year of assessment, I'm aware that there are many businesses, in particular after Hurricane Melissa, which had appealed for this consideration. And therefore, this is yet another indication that this administration is a listening and caring administration. It is, these pieces of legislation, I believe, are, I wouldn't say simple, but straightforward, because it points to the fact that equitable and caring policies of the administration are intended to benefit the people of Jamaica, whether we consider employers or employees. The bills have my strong support. I listened earlier to contributions from members of the opposition regarding, in particular, the asset tax. And when I debate in Parliament, or when I listen to parliamentary debate, I'm always cognizant of the fact that there are Jamaicans who are younger, who might not be au fait with our history, who are observing and listening to our words. So if we listen to the opposition, the notion that the Jamaican economy fell into the doldrums in 2007 might be contemplated as true, or that the Jamaican economy fell into the doldrums in 2011, 2012, might be contemplated as true. This is absolutely not so, sir. If we are to properly interrogate the fortunes of the Jamaican economy, it would not escape attention that there are two instances in history where the Jamaican economy suffered hits which accounted for approximately 40% of GDP. One was not too long ago during Hurricane Melissa, where it's estimated approximately $7-8 billion has been accounted for approximately 40% of GDP. And it is well known that in order to keep an economy operating, in order to keep our systems operating, our police stations, our medical centers, revenues are important. And therefore, it's a no-brainer that inevitably, with that magnitude of a hit on the economy, a tax package could not be avoided in order to deal with the fallout, the major fallout from a natural disaster. But the other occasion during which the Jamaican economy was estimated to be hit by approximately 40% of GDP was during the 1990s, the FinSac debacle, the high interest rate policies of the PNP administration, which almost wrecked the Jamaican economy beyond oblivion. So when we contemplate the challenges being faced by the Jamaican economy, which led to, when we contemplate the challenges facing the Jamaican economy in 2007 and even in 2011 and 12, it cannot escape attention that much of that was occasioned by the iniquitous policies of the PNP administration, which destroyed the Jamaican economy, accounting for almost 40% of GDP. And I now come to the asset tax.
Who was the secretary? Who was the secretary for enchanting that? Yes. Who was the secretary?
The asset tax was imposed. Regarding the asset tax, the assessment of it as inflationary, I don't contest that. I've heard the views of the Honorable Michael Lee-Chin. I've heard the view of a distinguished CEO such as Keith Duncan. And it is not a tax that I stand here and argue should be permanent. However, to argue that now is the opportune time to rescind that measure, when the Jamaican economy has been hit so severely by Hurricane Melissa, is to be unreasonable. I reject the arguments of the opposition as inherently unreasonable. But as we recollect our history, the asset tax was imposed in 2011, 2013, being the year of assessment, as what the former PNP administration had conveyed to be a temporary measure, which they would review during their term. That review never took place. That review, Senator Ferguson, never took place. And I'm speaking of this asset tax, which was imposed by the PNP administration, of which the senior leadership of the PNP was a member of that cabinet. In fact, Senator Ferguson, a member of that cabinet as well, that imposed the asset tax on the people of Jamaica. A crucial member of that cabinet was one Fenton Rodiard Ignatius Ferguson. Yes? That is the administration that imposed the asset tax on the backs of the people of Jamaica. Let history recall that. It is the former PNP administration that imposed that tax on the people of Jamaica. So it is a bit hypocritical to hear the opposition stand here today and suggest that they are
hypocritical. It was clearly established why we implemented the asset tax at the time. It was used as a revenue measure.
That's not a point of order.
Misleading the House.
That's not even the standing orders. You have a lot to learn about the parliamentary process. So make no mistake about it. The asset tax was imposed in 2012 by the PNP administration. It is the administration of Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness which amended the tax in 2019 to reduce the scope of its application on businesses. And again, it is the administration of Dr. Holness that in 2021 cut that tax in half. We have taken credible steps to reduce the impact of that taxation, the asset tax imposed by the PNP administration. In short, sir, I submit to the Parliament of Jamaica that the opposition, including Senator Small Ferguson it is, has no credibility to speak on the matter of the asset tax. Absolutely no credibility. And I hear Senator Brown speak about tax package. I hear Senator Brown speak about the tax package and in an ostensible attempt to score political points because of the challenges imposed by this natural disaster on Jamaicans. I invite the people of Jamaica to recall, anytime they hear the opposition speaking about taxation, it is the same opposition that when they were in government, last in government, imposed 60 billion in taxes on the backs of the Jamaican people. 60 billion in taxes on the backs of the Jamaican people. I invite the people of Jamaica to contemplate any time they hear the opposition speaking about this conscientious taxation package this administration has arrived at. These are the same individuals who tax patty, imposed a levy on handcart vendors. And there was a time as well when they moved to tax the savings of hundreds of thousands of Jamaicans. The opposition has no credibility to speak about taxation. Absolutely no credibility. Before I close, the matter of the National Housing Trust. Again, assuming things are perfect, no administration would want to tap into the country's housing resources for budgetary support. However, we exist in an imperfect situation. And I recall when Dr. Peter Phillips came to the Parliament of Jamaica with legislation to tap funds from the NHT, he made the point that it's important to the sustainability of the Jamaican economy. And if the Jamaican economy does well, there would be greater likelihood of positive outflows from the NHT. I submit that that argument applies today. That argument applies today in light of a natural disaster.
Senator Morris and Senator Brown, please allow the speaker to complete and then you all can contribute if you wish.
I'm not even hearing them, sir. I submit that that argument applies today. The sustainability of the Jamaican economy is important to the outflows from the NHT. Yes? That's the argument Dr. Phillips submitted to the Parliament when he brought legislation intended to tap $45 billion from the National Housing Trust. Again, sir, I listen in amazement when I hear the opposition speak about the NHT. The same individuals who, when they were in government, tapped approximately $180 million of the people's housing money to fund an ostensibly bankrupt purchase of a property, the outer many property. Again, sir, when it comes down to the issue of use of the people's housing money, the opposition, including Senator Brown, they have no credibility to speak on that matter. Absolutely no credibility. In closing, again, it is important that in the administration of policy, that in its posture, any administration offers certainty, fiscal prudence, and compassion. I believe that those virtues are espoused by these bills: an act to amend the Asset Tax Act and an act to amend the Income Tax Act. For that reason, sir, the bills have my strong support. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fitzhenley. Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, I rise to participate in this debate and to start specifically by looking at the Act to amend the Income Tax Act, and to commend the move which has been made to give employers a tax relief for any payments not exceeding in the aggregate $200,000 or such sum as may be prescribed by the minister by order, subject to affirmative resolution in the House of Representatives, which is paid by an employer to an employee. And this goes back retroactively from November 1st, 2025. So it covers quite clearly the impact which a worker would have suffered as a result of Hurricane Melissa. I only ask one question. There are many employers who might not have contributed to their employee, but have made significant contributions to persons who had suffered damage. We applauded their efforts. There are some indeed where the minister placed on record in the Hansard as to the significant and magnificent contributions which they made. And I wonder why it is that it wasn't contemplated that businesses generally would be able to get a benefit in light of their charitable efforts which they made, and which was well received and appreciated by those who suffered loss during Melissa, and those who are still suffering loss, those who are still in shelters months after the impact of Hurricane Melissa. So I asked that question. I would have liked to see, I like data. Strangely, because I'm not an accountant, I have no dexterity for figures, but I would have liked to see. And it maybe you have it, Senator Hill, it has not yet been shared with the public, but it would have been good to have got an indication of exactly who would benefit and how much it would mean to have that deduction. So I made that point, Mr. President. And I also want to make a point on the asset tax. Much has been said about it, but I think there are some agreements. One, it was a temporary measure. Two, the then opposition opposed it en bloc. They were totally opposed to the imposition of this asset tax. That's another agreement. The fact of the matter is that one also accepts that at the time it was imposed, it was going to be a temporary measure. And I hear the mutterings about the necessity to have this tax now because of the devastation of Hurricane Melissa. But let me say this. If the government had really been convinced that this tax is distortionate, that it affects the financial sector, that funds which could have been used to drive the economy through loans, and indeed could have assisted in putting us on a pathway to growth, that those funds, that it should not have continued. How can you say 10 years later that you have to keep it because of Melissa? The fact of the matter is that it should have been lifted a long time ago, and we should have been looking to other sources to help us to recover from Melissa, because there is no responsible person in this country who could deny that assistance is needed to recover from Hurricane Melissa. In fact, those who said, oh, there will be no new taxes, it's not on the horizon, might have been only wishful thinking. But anybody who was realistic knew that a disaster of this magnitude and of this proportion would have to alter the intentions of the government in terms of taxation. Let me make it clear, we are going to come to a discussion on it. I question some of the measures that I've heard. Some of them I'm baffled as to how they will be implemented, but sufficient until the day. But Mr. President, Mr. President, credibility, as has been said by some on the government side, is an important feature of leadership. Yes. Trust is an important feature of leadership. And so when you say on the one hand that this thing doesn't work, that it affects how you function, Senator Duncan, that it is not supposed to happen, you can't come now and say it's because of Melissa. You cannot say it is because of Melissa, especially when this government's biggest boast is about its capacity for fiscal management and its capacity for fiscal stability. You cannot now say that it is because of Melissa. After 10 years, sometimes I don't think that you all remember you've been there so long, you know. We remember, but sometimes I wonder if you, when you discuss, sometimes I wonder, sometimes when I hear you all go back to a young man, go back to 1990s and FinSAC, I wonder which universe it is that you inhabit, that you think that anybody even hears what you say. We have long passed that. And you're stuck in a situation which those young people who are voting for you don't care about, and they don't hear, and they're not interested. So I don't know I don't know why it is that you feel, Senator Hill, I don't know why it is that you feel, Senator Hill, that is a platform on which you, Senator Hill, you know I like you very much. I don't want, I'm not going to allow you to disturb my calm today and to point out anything further. So finally, Mr. President, the opposition supports these measures. We are realistic and we are pragmatic. We just don't like the narrative to be embedded in a position which is not authentic nor credible. But we understand why this is necessary, and we support it, if it pleases you.
Thank you, Senator Scott Motley. Senator Hill.
Mr. President, I stand because I hear confusion. It is because of the asset tax why, or what would have become of Jamaica if there was not the asset tax. And then it says, do away with it, and why are we having it because of Melissa? Mr. President, confusion. So let me try and put some light on it. Mr. President, I'd like to just say to my good friend, Senator Small Ferguson, emphasis is not on small, and it's all right, man. It's okay, Mr. President, because I know he is well trained. I know where he got his degrees. I know the kind of technical stuff he has had to study to get that degree. And I know he knows that one of the basic rules of economics is that all taxes are distortionary, not just asset tax. All taxes. So we're never going to do. We're not going. So no, you come on. We're never going to get away from the other taxes. But so we pick out the asset tax as if we're going to do away with the other taxes. All taxes are distortionary. There are all of us. There's be another law. All of us, Mr. President, all of us have said many things on the asset tax. We understand. I spent 35 years of my career in the financial sector. I understand. The very person that Senator Anderson named in her presentation, I've spent many hours with him talking about the asset tax. I know the feeling of the asset tax. But, Mr. President, there's something called timing. Senator Small Ferguson, if you had stood up right after the election and said, we're going to win it, what about the asset tax? Maybe, but after Melissa, 7 of our parishes have been denuded, have been out there, and you would not believe that we would have to look at a tax package, because when there was an additional $100 billion for COVID-19, we managed the economy with the buffers we put in, and we didn't raise taxes. We had 9 budgets without any raising of taxes. When we came in, the minimum tax was the minimum wage rate was $5,600. A month after we came in, we raised it, and we raised it consistently to where it is $16,000. We want people to keep their money. We made it clear that we will not go after direct taxes. We will go after indirect taxes, so you pay taxes when you spend, not when you earn. The government just takes it out, and we keep raising it. So we are the government who would love Senator Small Ferguson to make sure all that money stays with you. And I hear the fact that yes, we need capital. You know, I speak to the Bank of Jamaica. The Bank of Jamaica comes to cabinet and tells us often, And they tell us every time we ask, and we do ask, how is the financial sector? They are strong and profitable. So we know that there is pain that the asset tax has not been returned. But you, at this time, 3 months or so after Melissa, when we're still looking at how we're going to return and the money we're going to get, to say that we must return the asset tax is unrealistic and doesn't have any basis in reason at this time. But you know, you say you want capital. You said you're going to need more capital to expand and grow, and we agree. The quality of the performance of the Andrew Holness administration is so high that the international financial institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, the IDB, CAF, the Caribbean Development Bank, without a formal request from the government, said, here, we see what you've done. Here is $6.5 billion. And to you now, Senator Small Ferguson, out of that 6.2 billion, 6.5 billion, 2.4 of that 6.5 billion is for the private sector. You don't understand what I'm saying, so slow down. I'm speaking to Senator Small Ferguson because I know he knows. The 2.4 billion of that 6.5 is for the private sector. My encouragement to you and your clients is make sure you have the capacity to manage that $2.4 billion. It's a lot of money. Get ready to have it. Capital is there for you to use. You run a profitable organization. The BOJ say our financial sector is strong. The government has to do what it has to do. You know, when I ran banks, I looked after Mr. President. When I ran financial institutions, for as long as I told you, I defended the relatively narrow self-interest of the financial institutions I ran. That was my job. The Prime Minister gave me the great privilege of sitting in cabinet. Now my vista has to be different. It has to be broader. It has to be not just a financial sector that has made me a lot of what I am. I love it, but I have a broader responsibility. How do I look after the poor people in St. Elizabeth around where I grow, or in Portland, or in Westmoreland that has been wiped out by Melissa? Therefore, my vista is very different. And not only is it broader, but I have to look at the fiscal responsibility of the government in which I serve. So I am willing to understand, but at this stage, the heavy weather that is being made of the asset tax so soon after Melissa is unwarranted and is a misfit. So, Mr. President, I want to commend those private sector businesses that gave and that are the subject of these amendments today. They have gone out and given money to help their employees get back to life. That's an amazing, and Adam Stewart leads it. He never fire one person, as my colleague Avka said, and he helped them too, and there are others who have helped. We need to make sure we give them the compliment and make it statutorily so in what Minister Favour Williams has done. But, Mr. President, on the asset tax, the heavy weather that is being made is not realistic, and the government has gone out and found money, 2.4 billion of it, which will go out on the NARA, which the Prime Minister has announced. We have people who have been seeking the CEO of NARA. NARA, the CEO is going to come in soon. NARA is going to work. Senator Small Ferguson, there's money there for you and your clients. And, Mr. President, because of the great work being done by the private sector, I completely support these two amendments, if it pleases you, Mr. President.
Minister?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. And, oh, thank you. Oh, I don't think I need that, but it's okay. Thank you, though. Right. As always, Mr. President, I thank colleagues for their contributions to the debate. As even if we don't agree with everything, the fact is that we are here to ensure that we do what we think is best in the interests of the people of Jamaica. And we want to believe that everyone comes to the table with that very same commitment in their hearts. It is the oath that we take when we swear to become members of this honorable chamber. And in that context, I want to particularly recognize the constructive proposal made by Senator Tomlinson. Sorry.
Thomas.
No.
Thomas.
I am having my own issue now.
And this is who you mean?
No. It was something useful from Senator who?
Huh? Senator Tomlinson, right. So I am having an issue because of Thompson and Tomlinson and other confusions. I'm positively recognizing, perhaps maybe not on the right path, but I wanted to recognize in the context of the good faith in which we all come here, your contribution and your proposal that we monitor personal income tax as a possible risk. Because clearly it is, and the ministry is, and tax is monitoring revenue closely because of the circumstances in which we are. But we take the constructive recommendation that you have put on the table, that is to say, you're looking at the corporate side, and it's important to keep the personal side in view as well. And so I just want to recognize that that type of constructive proposal, it clearly comes from a good place and comes from a good understanding of where we are and what it is that we're about today in the bills before us. So I just wanted to recognize that very briefly. So, Mr. President, I want to, however, move from that to a perspective that maybe I didn't anticipate, and that was a sort of attempt to try to criticize a particular presentation that was made here today. And I want to just pull from the criticism one assertion that was made, and this is that leadership is not convenient. Leadership is absolutely not convenient. Leadership is about taking the tough decisions. But national leadership is also not about representing narrow special interests and no specific sector. And if you cannot understand the difference between leadership that you offer to a private institution and leadership that you offer on a national stage, then that is problematic in terms of understanding that a scope must be wider. All sectors. Senator gave a perspective on it in saying that when he moved from private sector to public, he had to think differently about business. It was no longer about the business he used to lead. It was now about how is there greater benefit from the smaller business to the largest. And that is the reality of national leadership. So, Mr. President, I want to say that the credibility and the explanation that was given by Senator Duncan earlier is one that the opposition should find instructive. Yes. The criticisms that were brought are found to be skirting on the side of the disingenuous, because there is a difference in approach that must be when you move from private to public sector. So I wanted to make that point for the record, Mr. President, because I would not have anticipated the type of criticisms that I heard today at all. And they, in fact, go to the credibility of their issuance. Mr. President, I want to make the point that this administration recognizes 100% that we have a duty to be fiscally responsible.
Absolutely.
We also recognize that, as was stated on the other side, that credibility is absolutely critical to economic management, especially in difficult times. And what we are certain of as well is that this administration has not only been clear, but we have demonstrated our commitment to give back, reduce, and eliminate taxes everywhere we have been able to, when we have been able to afford it. It has been difficult. It has taken tough strategic decisions. It has taken balancing of different circumstances and interests, but we have taken those tough decisions. And some of it has included continuing the NHT when it was something that we objected to when you imposed it. And certainly, when you have a tax hole that has to be filled, you have to look at what you're going to fill it with. So if the opposition is saying that we should take back the increases in PATH, if they're saying that we shouldn't have given a social pension to those over 70 who don't have a pension coming from anywhere, if they are saying that we should not have provided an income tax credit or increased the tax threshold, again, making sure that we give back the benefits of sound economic management, then we understand why the Jamaican people took a particular decision on September 3rd last year. Because the credibility and the trust lies on this side. So, Mr. President, when I heard Senator Small Ferguson, when I heard him say that it's a tax, you know, where when a business earns more, it should pay more, and when it earns less, it should pay less. But, you know, that doesn't sound like a tax of this design works against the growth we seek to achieve. Paraphrasing, but I think I caught most of it verbatim. What struck me was that this was the very consideration why we also eliminated the minimum business tax that administration also imposed on every business in Jamaica. You had to pay $60,000 before you earned the first dollar. And in fact, even if you didn't earn it, you had to pay $60,000, and it stifled growth, it stifled small business, and we eliminated it early in the administration when we were able. When we were able. And when we were able, we reduced the asset tax to where we thought we could afford it to do so. So when you asked the question, Senator Anderson, you made reference to Minister Williams' indication that we would reduce the asset tax when the budget permits, and you asked, what does that mean? What does that mean? The very fact that you ask what does that mean means you do not understand affordability. Minister Williams said, as we committed before, and I will read from the, Mr. President, this administration sits on a political party which forms the administration. No, this is how our Westminster democracy works. I just want to read our commitment, which is that we are also committed to reducing and ultimately eliminating the asset tax requirement for regulated financial institutions as fiscal space allows. This is our policy. This is our policy and part of the policy based on which we were elected. So, Mr. President, certainly, if you think that you have a $134.6 billion deficit, this is what faces us, this is a reality now, then clearly the fiscal circumstances would not permit. It is as simple as that.
It's very simple.
Very simple. This sort of grand industry that has been created around what does it mean for a budget and what's stifling of capital, our policy hasn't changed. When we manage the budget overall, it is about tough decisions. It is about tough decisions. And the reality is that the Jamaican people understand. And we are committed to continue to explain the policies as best as possible. The minister will open the budget in just a couple weeks. and she will undoubtedly not only explain the budget, but contextualize the revenue measures. Mr. President, it's important that when we recognize the circumstances in which our country finds itself, and when you recognize, it's funny, when I was preparing earlier, and I was once again, writing the words about the strength of Melissa, the devastation that was caused, the extent of the damage caused, the fact that physical damage alone was initially estimated at 8.8 billion. We know that it's more since then. So I initially questioned, do you repeat this? Do people feel like they have heard it too much already? But when I hear questions like, how can you say that Melissa is causing this? Then I realize that we have to keep repeating it, because the reality is that we are not in normal times. Half of the island was devastated. No, that's exactly what you said. You said, and let me just find, how can you say that this is because of Melissa, and why wasn't it done over the last 10 years? I dealt with the first part already, which is to say that we made a balance of decisions. And are you saying that it would be better to not grant a social pension to the over 70, or to remove for the financial sector a lot? No, it's always a balancing act. It's always about strategic balancing. And that is the point I'm trying to get through. But their failure to understand it demonstrates once more, and every time they say it, why people should trust this Andrew Holness-led administration and not their side with the economy. But Mr. President, I will not, however, prolong the debate, because the two key points that I wanted to make in relation to the interventions on that side have been made. And I simply want to, in closing, address the final point made on that side, which was which I think is worthy of mention, and that was the actual threshold that was instituted in respect of persons receiving or being eligible for this tax benefit on the recipient side. And I wondered if I was missing something, because it sounded to me like the support was being granted to the most vulnerable, and that the incentive, therefore, was to ensure that the most vulnerable workers were able to benefit fully from this, from any honorarium or support given under this measure. And it struck me that I couldn't understand why you would argue against that, and why you would not understand that it can't be everybody, and that you can't institute tax policy in respect of one grouping in a parish and not an entire country. Mr. President, I really wish to say, Mr. President, that while I thank colleagues for their presentations today, I recognize that there's still a way to go in ensuring that we are always looking at the most vulnerable. Mr. President, in a way that maybe doesn't fit in with our narratives, but I want to also make a clear point that I had not made when I opened the debate, and this is just to indicate, Mr. President, that there are two amendments that are to be taken to the income tax amendment bill, and they will be, of course, moved in committee. The amendments were circulated, and they are to clause 2C. They are to clause 1C for big C. Mr. President, this is, hold on, no. In the income tax bill, in clause 2, right, income tax clause 2C, yes, the amendment is now to put in new subsection 1C4C is to delete the words for a period and to substitute the words within a period. And this is just to make sure that there is a more specific reference. And also in the same section, that is the same 1C4C, to delete the words section 20, 2C, and substitute for those words in section 22C. So essentially just insertion of the word in. So, Mr. President, we will move those amendments in committee. They're just clarifying perhaps editorial in the last context. And in that context, I ask for second reading of the bill. Bills.
The question is that the two bills which have been the subject of the presentation of the minister and debate, the Asset Tax Specific Bodies Amendment Act 2026 and the Income Tax Amendment Act 2026 be read for a second time.
Take that motion. It has been brought to my attention, Mr. President, that the sign language interpretation is not being provided this week again. And I decided to raise it, Mr. President, because it has been a feature of the Parliament for the past 13 years. And I know that, you know, it's one person that we have doing the signing. And I believe that it is of such importance to the deaf community that we need to make sure that we have another person being trained and to give support in this very critical area. I don't know what is the reason for the absence, again, of the sign language interpreter, but it is of critical importance that we need to make sure that at all times there is someone here to do this sign language.
Thank you.
For the deaf.
May I just speak to Senator Scott Motley and Senator Johnson Smith, please? Come on, please. Senator Johnson Smith, please. Senator Morris, you don't have to stand. I note with concern also your issues that you raised, and I suspect that the culmination of the absence of the individual on the previous occasion came about, or the culmination of it took place today, and she was unavoidably absent. I've indicated to Senator Scott Motley what the situation is. I go further to say that the replacement rests with the individual and not the Parliament. But it's perhaps something that we need to look at. But Senator Scott Motley will indicate. But it's not something that we take lightly at all. The question is that the bills that I identified be read for a second time. Those in favor? Against?
So a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Assets Tax Specified Bodies Act read a second time. And also a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider both bills clause by clause, and I will begin with the Asset Tax Specified Bodies Amendment Act 2026. Members, I put clauses 1 and 2. Those in favor? You have to respond to me, for the record. I put clauses 1 and 2. Those in favor? I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? The ayes have it. The question is that I do report this bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Against? In relation to the Income Tax Amendment Act 2026, I put clause 1 of the act. All in favor? Against? The ayes have it. As far as clause 2 is concerned, I put the circulated amendments to clause 2. Those in favor? I put clause 2 as amended. Those in favor? Thank you. I put clauses 3, 4, 5. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? Against? None. Thank you. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 2 amendments. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I do report the Asset Tax Specified Bodies Amendment Act 2026 as having passed committee stage without amendment, and that also report the Income Tax Amendment Act 2026 as having passed committee stage with 2 amendments. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Might I ask for third reading of the bill?
Members would have heard the question. That is to say that both bills be read for a third time. Those in favor?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Assets Tax Specified Bodies Act read a third time and passed, and a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act read a third time and passed.
Thank you very much. Minister?
Not intended to do any further business today. Might the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed?
Members should have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? This Honorable Senate now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed. Oh, you almost forget this.
Jamaica is driving in comfort towards a sustainable future.
Overtake and bring back everything.
Bask in the awesome Word of God and the life-changing experience of fellowship. Bask in the revival time.